Hello, and welcome to episode 12 of my Stuarts vlog. Today we're going to be thinking about the Anglican Church and the Anglican story through the period 1625 to 88. A lot of people feel kind of intimidated and out of their comfort zone, I think, with the Anglican story, but I want to encourage you today to think about it strategically and thoughtfully, and to consider whether, if this sort of question does come up, then that you might answer it. So that said, I don't think I've ever seen a question specifically on the Anglican Church. I am slightly nervous that will crop up one day. If it does, I think it's likely to be about the position and status of the Anglican Church within Stuart Britain, and that's going to revolve really around the story that I'm about to unpack and that you hopefully kind of know. So we're going to take it through the three phases: Charles I, Republic, Restoration, and what we're considering is what the impact of events were upon the status and position of the Anglican Church. So when our scene opens in 1625, the Anglican Church is the preeminent religious establishment in England, no question. There exists in England in 1625 a confessional state. Remember, a confessional state is one where the powers of the state apply equally to the religious conduct of the individuals. So what this means is that if you do not go to church on a Sunday, you can be fined and ultimately imprisoned by the government, by the state, because of your lack of religious activity. Now, during the Charles I's reign, the position of the Anglican Church is eroded a bit and undermined by the actions of Charles and his Archbishop of Canterbury, William Laud. William Laud, in fact, joined the Privy Council first in 1628 as Bishop of London, and then became Archbishop of Canterbury in 1633. And as you know, he brought with him a load of reforms. Now, what these reforms did to the Anglican Church was to drag it to being closer towards Catholicism than it had ever been before. So it's still Anglican. If you said to William Laud, "Oh, you're a bit Catholic," he would be quite cross with you. He's not Catholic at all. He's an Arminian. He is a Protestant. But to many people, his actions and activities seemed quite Catholic. For instance, he saw the advantage in using liturgy and quite sort of sensual practices within the Anglican Church. More than so, he demanded that the priests wore their robes. He liked the idea of music and of art and incense in the services. They put a rail around the communion table, and they put the communion table in the east of the table. The east of the church, all of which seemed to be kind of pushing things back towards how they had been before the Reformation. However, we know these reforms or attempts to impose these sort of reforms in Scotland creates massive trouble. In England, they are met with grumbling, but not overt opposition. And so right up to 1640, you have got this position of a confessional state and a dominant Anglican Church, and people kind of sucking it up on that. However, when the Long Parliament meets at the end of the personal rule, they do start to kick back at Laud and his reforms in the Church of England. And they do that partly because they see Laud as part of the problem that Charles I is bringing to them. And they also do that because there's a hard core of Puritans within the Parliament who want to rescue the Church of England from these Catholic influences as they see them. So Puritans, remember, want to purify the Church of England from any smell or stain of Catholicism. And so in 1640, they have William Laud arrested. He's imprisoned in the Tower of London, and eventually in 1645, he's beheaded. In 1641, they enforce a rule on Charles I that says that he mustn't have any bishops in his Privy Council. And then later on that year, they remove bishops from the House of Lords. And there's an attempt actually to scrap the position of bishops completely in 1641, although it doesn't work at that point. They also end the prerogative courts. This means no more church courts, and this really makes it very difficult for the church to enforce the laws that have been passed by the land. So that results later on in the state taking on some more kind of moral laws, as we'll see. Now, into the Civil War, still a confessional state, and still the Church of England is predominant. However, in 1643, that kind of begins to be undermined by Parliament's alliance with the Scots. That is sealed with 1643, the Solemn League and Covenant with the Scots. As part of that agreement, Parliament in Westminster agrees with the Scots that after the Civil War, they will bring a Presbyterian church to England. Immediately, they set up the Westminster Assembly that runs from 1643 to 53 to kind of debate how that could work, and that, as it says, it goes on for a decade. And actually, in the end, although bishops are removed, what they settle down with in the Republican era, of course, is just for having a more tolerant, less centralised system. And so during the Republic era, after the execution of Charles I, you no longer have a confessional state. And the Toleration Act is passed in 1650, which means there is freedom for people to go to church on Sunday if they wish, or to not go to church on Sunday, or to go to a different church on Sunday. And this kind of opens up the whole kind of idea of toleration and of selecting your own religion, which we're more familiar and perhaps comfortable with. But of course, it undermines the Anglican Church's position within society and within the Stuart community. The Blasphemy Act is also passed in 1650, and that takes blasphemy away from being a church crime and into being a state crime. And the setting up by Cromwell of the Triers and Ejectors Committee in 1654 also kind of softens what the Church of England is about in that era by allowing any competent and well-educated applicant to become a minister in the Church of England. And what this means, of course, is that they're no longer able to control a very narrow church like this. They're now having a broader and broader church that reflects a greater range of ideas and options to the public. So this very much, I would say, that at the start of your reign in Charles I's era, start of the Stuart era, you're looking at a confessional state. In the Republican era, you're very much looking at not a confessional state, and you need to be able to explain the differences between those two time periods. The big question then comes: is a confessional state restored in the Restoration? Now, the answer to this, of course, as in most history questions, is well, kind of, a bit. So what happens with Restoration is that all acts since 1641 are null and void, and that includes the Toleration Act. So immediately, people now, in theory, have to go along to the Church of England. There's also, although in the Declaration of Breda, Charles II says, I'll be nice and tolerant, and although in the Worcester House Declaration in 1660, I think, which was a Worcester House conference, was a gathering of the various kind of church leaders. Although that declaration that came out at the end of that conference suggested that there would continue to be a fairly broad Anglican church with lots of views taken into account, actually that's very quickly superseded by the Cavalier Parliament and the Savoy House Conference, both of which want to go back to a more extreme confessional state type arrangement. So coming out of that, you get Gilbert Sheldon, the new Archbishop of Canterbury, becomes Archbishop of Canterbury in 1663, very keen on enforcing Anglicanism upon the population. Of course, you get the Clarendon Code, which is very clear about trying to uniformize, apply some uniformity to the Church of England, and also getting rid of people within the church who don't agree with that. And so it's very much an attempt, a strong arm really, attempt to set the clock back to how it had been under Charles I. And the Test Act, of course, also does that. And what it means in the Test Act, and just the Test Act. In fact, the Test Act means that you have to be an Anglican in order to take up public office. And so, of course, then that means, again, that anyone who wants to have a public job, an MP, a judge, any sort of member of the civil service, they have to be or swear to be members of the Church of England and swear off being a Catholic. All of this suggests that there is a confessional state again by the end in the Restoration, by the end of 1688. However, there are two or three things which say actually it's kind of a confessional state, but it's not in the strength of position that it had been earlier on. And again, they're fairly obvious things. First of all, you've got successive monarchs, Charles II and James II, who aren't really Anglicans themselves. Charles II, of course, in 1662 and 1672, attempts to bring toleration back through the declarations of indulgence. He's slapped down, but it suggests that the confessional state isn't quite as secure as it had been. And James II takes that on himself in 1685 to 88 by trying to impose that idea of a declaration of indulgence and toleration by decree. Secondly, the exclusion crisis is an attempt by Parliament to ensure that the next monarch can't be Catholic. And what this, of course, shows, and their failure, of course, shows, is that there's a limit to the confessional state, and that limitation is that they cannot guarantee that the next monarch is Anglican. And in fact, even so, James II is an Anglican, he's Catholic, and even when William of Orange comes over, he also is not an Anglican, not least because he's Dutch. So I should wrap up really. In answer to the question, does the Church of England, does Church of England's position get restored back to how it was? The answer is kind of. It is sort of legally, and it is for those people that want to go. It becomes again the preeminent and predominant force in terms of religious life. However, there is still now a measure of toleration. The cat's out of the bag a little bit, and that does mean that by the end, in 1688, its position is not as strong as it had been in 1625. Thanks for watching. I hope that helps, and I will see you next time when we talk about Catholics.